Now we will get an address on the foundations for RPL practices, focused on institutional commitment. This will be given by Irene Sheridan, Head of Extended Campus in Munster Technological University, former Cork Institute of Technology. So please, Irene, if you would like to continue, I stop share this and you could take over.
So thanks very much to the RPL in Practice Conference Committee for the invitation to talk to you here today. And thanks very much to you, all of the participants. The level of interest in the conference is a great indication of the enthusiasm that there is for recognition of prior learning across higher education. As Anders says, I'm Irene Sheridan. I work in Munster Technological University, and you'll have to forgive me if I occasionally say CIT. We've just been rebranded or relaunched as Munster Technological University on the 1st of January, so we're still getting used to it. A bit about myself. My background is in electronic engineering and satellite telecommunications, and I've worked in a range of industries, from a small Irish design company developing prototypes for the European Space Agency to Apple Computer here in Cork, before I entered academia. And I suppose I always felt I had a foot in both camps. In 2007, I had an opportunity to move from my then position as head of electronic engineering in CIT. And since then, I have worked exclusively at the academic enterprise interface, exploring and developing practices for what can happen in that space in between. And a big part of that space in between is about learning. And recognition of prior learning is a key part for us of our partnerships and relationships with enterprise. My colleague Deirdre Goggin and I have really enjoyed our involvement in this RPL in Practice project. From our experience in national and European projects over many years, we knew that there were varying levels of practice and indeed readiness for RPL in Ireland and throughout Europe. And this project took a really hands-on approach to working through the process with some of our European partners and identifying the steps and stages and experiences for the institution, the quality assurance agencies, and the learners. And through the project, we were able to share our experiences, our student supports, our staff supports, and most importantly, our beliefs. And we believe that learning happens everywhere, that the workplace is itself a valid and valuable centre of learning, and that the only challenge for us in higher education is to recognise and value that learning. We believe that people should build on and not repeat their learning, and we never get tired of saying it. And I suppose the reason why I've been invited here to talk about institutional commitment is because of the commitment shown by my own organisation over the past 2 decades. By now, close to 7,000 applications have been processed. Hundreds and hundreds of academic staff have been involved in assessment. In 2019, we celebrated 20 years of practice, with some really nice feedback from staff, from employers, from learners who've been through the process. We're not the only institution with this kind of history, I'm sure, but we're pretty unusual in Ireland. And even the fact that we have collected and continued to collect data sets, that sets us apart a bit and was certainly groundbreaking 20 years ago. We've developed and matured a database of precedents of cases, which gives us, again, a nice step towards a kind of a quality assurance or a support for staff in the process. And look, all of this is impressive. The number of major awards and programs and modules and advanced entry and access applications are really impressive, I'm sure. But before we ask the question of how we've done that, the really important question about institutional commitment is why? What's the driving force? Why would you want to facilitate RPL applications? And you've seen loads of comments in the chat about, oh, how much it costs and all of the resources that are required and all of the different barriers. But let me tell you, our history is deeply rooted in our community. Our closeness to learners, workers, employers in our region, our impact on society is really important to us. And historically, our involvement with RPL began in 1996 with project work to test the concept and the impact. And honestly, one cannot fail to be moved by the difference it makes in people's lives, the opening up of opportunities when you can recognize and respect what people have learned through their experiences and through work. When people who perhaps entered the workplace directly from school realize they're not excluded from higher education and that they don't have to start at the bottom. When they realize that they have learned something and that that learning has value. Once you've seen that, you can't stop. You have to find ways to make it happen. So if you know why, the next and really less important question is how. And for us, over the years, we have developed policy documents, we've matured our approach to policy with some reviews, we've developed supports. Our situation is that you can use evidence of prior learning that is current and relevant, as long as it meets clearly established standards of sufficiency and reliability. It can be used for access, it can be used for exemption, it can be used for what we call advanced entry and full award. And well, what do you need to have? Outside of the institution, there are some things that are essential. And I've seen an awful lot of talk about legislation being required. I put it the opposite way. What you need to have is no legal barrier, nothing that stops you from doing it. What you're doing here in recognizing prior learning is you're recognizing evidence of learning that's presented to you by students in ways that you can prescribe, that is robustly assessed by you as higher education experts. Surely our laws already enable us to do that. I can't stress enough the importance of a clear and well-articulated and widely understood national framework of qualifications. In Ireland, that's the responsibility of QQI, and that has been a pillar on which much of the development of higher education has been based, not least RPL. It facilitates an enhanced relationship with our employer partners, and for us, the importance of those relationships with professional bodies, employers. That's where we develop relationships of trust and understanding to consider what we're doing and the value of those flexible pathways. The external climate has changed significantly over the 20 years for the better in terms of RPL. Inside the institution, what are the building blocks? Well, you need some champions. You need a small group of really dedicated people, because that's usually where these things start. And then you need to be able to scale up, to go from the kind of, this is good as a project basis into something that this is good for the institution. And for us, one of the things we've had throughout those 20 years is a focus on scholarship on RPL. EU projects, international links, publications, contributions to conferences. Our commitment isn't just to the practice, but to the philosophy, to the principles, to the highest standards of informed inquiry, to continuous improvement. And I think there hasn't been a time since 1996 when we haven't been involved in multiple international projects around RPL, work-based learning, customized learning, and so on. Developments in teaching and learning have been really important to the development of recognition of prior learning. Higher education in Ireland 25 years ago was a different place. We've developed confidence and maturity in diverse assessment methods and new means of teaching and learning. We understand the value of reflection and self-directed learning, which is at the core of this. We've moved away from the notion of having a vague listing of a syllabus and then a 3-hour closed book terminal exam that would happen months hence, into something that's much more involved and operates much more in a co-design process. We can confidently separate the acquisition of learning from its evidence base and the assessment of that learning. We focus on outcomes. And I know there will be talk about learning outcome and program design and its importance for RPL later in the day. We look at clear evidence of attainment of learning outcomes, not cramming in lists of prescribed inputs. We work with professional accreditations, award standards, the concept of graduateness. But most important of all, inside the institution, is the centrality of RPL. It's normal. It's not sidelined. It's not special. It's not by exception. We spoke earlier about people knowing about it. At the start of every academic year, every student and potential student to our university in MTU Cork is invited to all courses at all levels to talk about the potential that they may already have information that could be recognised. And we have, and let me make this really clear, very modest central resources. In our case, in our institution, we have one person dedicated to mentoring and supporting the learners in a completely sectoral agnostic way. Nothing about the actual discipline, but about how you might put together a portfolio of evidence in response to learning outcomes. One person. And we have one other person, because we're focused on scholarship, we have one other person dedicated to policy development, to employer partnerships, and to mapping best international practice. That's it. And those building blocks have allowed us to develop into what you've seen. What have we done? How have we benefited? We've increased the number of students. We've contributed to diversity and inclusion of our student base. And you can see in this some of the comments from staff about their experiences of having students who've come in through this process. We've benefited from and contributed to staff development in the institution and in Ireland generally. It's challenged our thinking. It's fostered innovation in programme design. It's brought the practice domain into the classroom. And for us, those relationships with employers are at the core of what we do. I lead what's called the extended campus, and we look at all kinds of collaboration. And for us, in looking at all kinds of collaboration, workforce development in conjunction with our partners is at the key, at the heart of that. And we've taken a sophisticated approach to codification and integration of engagement interactions across the whole university, and often RPL is where those conversations start. Working with companies for us, there are just 3 steps. It's where you are and where you want to go. And the middle bit is about developing customized pathways, incorporating micro-credentials, work-based learning, work-integrated learning, and recognition of prior learning. But everything starts with where you are. As a learner, as a cohort of learners, what you currently know, taking the time to understand and respect where the learners are now before we go down the next stages of designing a course in conjunction with the learner and the employer. And those customized co-design pathways are really important to us in terms of those relationships and relationship building. I have some examples here in the presentation. Maybe I'll just briefly talk about a partnership, for instance, with the Airline Flight Training or the Atlantic Flight Training Academy. That partnership worked with AFTA and a number of airlines to develop a customized degree program, which took account of the various elements of pilot training experience that the pilots already had, and then developed a flexible pathway incorporating work integrated learning and online learning to lead to the co-design award. It's international, it's available to pilots, and it's hugely successful, but it's based on knowing what they already know and valuing that in the context of credit on a framework. So to summarize, right, I haven't got a cookbook here. I know one of the quotes you spoke about earlier, Anders, it was a cookbook. I haven't got a cookbook, but what I've got is this. To make it happen, you've got to believe that learning happens outside the lecture halls and the labs. And you've got to want to make it happen. I agree. In Ireland, we've a huge participation rate in higher education. We don't necessarily need the extra students. So you've got to want to make this happen for other reasons. You've got to have a reasonably well-developed approach to learning outcomes and assessment methodologies, robust quality assurance mechanisms, and what you don't need is a whole pile of cash. That's it, guys.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Irene. You make it sound very simple. As soon as you know why, you will manage to do it. Are there any questions in the chat for Irene?
No questions, but very many fine words. What a fantastic presentation we heard. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Well, then I have a question. you said that you started sort of from a project basis, and then you went on, and now it's sort of integrated in your institution. What made that happen, to go from project to integrated?
Honestly, I think, Anders, and this is, as I say, a long time. So we did start with very small numbers, a few people, a few main drivers who we celebrated at our party to recognise the 20 years. But really, at a central level, what you have to be able to do is you have to be able to evidence the benefits. And we were able to evidence the benefits to individuals through their individual stories. It's about inclusion, participation, and breaking down the barriers to access, right? But we were also, and you have to be able to do this, we're not a charity, we are a publicly funded higher education institution in Ireland, so we've got to be able to show the benefits to everyone. We were able to illustrate the benefits to the institution. We got more students, we got a more diverse student body, we got a better understanding of what one learns in the workplace and how one can link with employers to harness that learning and build it into things. We got kudos for doing this work nationally. We got through our projects and through our international connections, we got recognition. Most universities like recognition. So, you know, you need a lot of different instruments in order to bring the management of your institution with you. And there was a real step, which was do not underestimate the real step that is required to take this from the periphery into the core, because it actually quite often you can convince your management through cost benefit analysis, you know, which take into account all kinds of kudos and recognition you'll get. Some of the difficulty is persuading your colleagues that this is worth it, persuading academic staff, admissions staff, registration staff, examination staff. Other barriers we overcame were persuading external examiners of the quality assurance of these routes. But persuading our colleagues took time. It also took supports. My colleague Deirdre Goggin, who you know as part of the project, developed handbooks for staff. We had precedence databases. We showed them decisions that other people had made. We brought together people to talk to each other, to demystify it, to say, actually, you're assessing evidence of learning. You do this all the time. You're good at this. So there were staff development opportunities. There were, I suppose, linkages as well with the quality assurance agencies, with the Higher Education Authority in Ireland. We tried, you know what we tried to do, and this came up earlier in the conversation, not enough people are asking for this. So one of the other drivers that brings your institution and your colleagues with you is demand, okay? So if you can stimulate the demand by telling people out there from the rooftops that this is a potential pathway, not misleading, not raising expectations you can't meet, but if you can stimulate demand from employers and employer groups, from individuals, from people, from community groups, that also drives change internally. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much, Irene. I think we could have one question, because I saw from the chat there were some questions arising.
Yes, we had a question here which you touched upon, Irene. Which are or were the hardest barriers that you met or you needed to overcome? And what were the key ingredients to overcome those barriers?
Okay, well, I do think there's a philosophical or conceptual barrier, Cecilia, among your colleagues, among staff, even among the potential applicants. You know, you need to be able to state it clearly. And one of the ways to overcome those barriers is actually to have some simple evidences of practice, right? If you have stories from learners who've done this, if you have stories from staff who've done this, and that's some of what my colleague gathered together as part of our celebration, little video clips, stories of success. So sometimes success breeds success. If you can tell people this is the way it worked and this is the difference it made, then that does overcome the barrier. I honestly think that people put far too much emphasis on the money or the resources. If you can overcome the issue that actually the biggest difficulty in making an RPL application is not for the higher education institution, it's for the learner. We're asking them to interrogate their own learning in a way that you never ask the people who sit in front of you in a class, or you rarely ask them. We're asking them to interrogate it, to document it, to evidence it, to put it into a particular format that the assessor will look at and understand. So the biggest barrier is actually for the learner, and they need support, not a huge amount of support, and often by building exemplars, by putting artifacts out there that will help those people, you overcome those issues.
Thank you, Irene. So one advice to all the higher education institutions is to create demand as well. Not only work internally, but also create demand for this. So good information on your websites and so forth. A little bit what David Crozier was mentioning earlier.